Okay, good morning, everybody. Good to be back here with you this morning, and hope everybody's doing okay. It's one of the most difficult challenges right now, of course, is I think for everyone is really the unknown, the fear of the unknown, and we're so used to having control and knowing what happens in the future, or at least in the immediate future, and there doesn't seem to be an immediate light at the end of the tunnel, which to me is more reason to proceed as forward. Because if you're waiting to something to happen, especially as a salesperson, if you're waiting for a momentum change or something to happen, who knows how long that'll take. So much of what we're trying to do now is proceed with the things we can control. My name is Mark Altman, and I'm honored to be invited by Naif. Thanks to Naif Mark Mail for allowing this opportunity to provide some learning and education to its members. Really appreciate that. And so, we're going to go for 30 minutes. My intention is that you get some clear takeaways and awarenesses out of this webinar today. And when it's over, I will hang around to answer any questions anybody has. Mark, could you change the slide for me? So a couple of things I always like to start out with. First of all, I really encourage you to set yourself up for success on this webinar. Shut off your phone, don't put it on vibrate, shut it off. Close down your email, really be present. It's only 30 minutes, and it's an opportunity for you to really lock in and focus on what we're talking about today. Slide, Mark, please. Really a very quick background about myself. I started Mindset Go 6 years ago. My goal is I work with organizations, different levels of leadership, sales teams, departmental teams, and so on communication, leadership, sales, service, employee engagement, things like that. And one of my big focus areas is emotional intelligence. And in sales, I believe that emotional intelligence is a huge factor. But due to time, we're going to keep it just simple for there. Mark, slide, please. All right, so the agenda. So what we're going to cover today is how to identify and articulate your most valuable selling points, change, clarify, create the perceptions you seek, engaging and influencing, scrapping elevator pitches, and being a memorable storyteller. Mark, if you would take the next slide. All right, so this is where I want to start. One of the things that's interesting in networking and in sales is perception. And we live in an era where people make snap judgments all the time. They see you walk in a room. And the question I'd ask all of you on this webinar is, do you know how other people perceive you? And if you feel like you have an accurate picture of how you are perceived, does it alter your behavior at all? And so the things I always like to talk about with perception are, what assumptions do people make about you when they physically see you? When they hear your job title, when they hear the company you work for. And so because we're in an era of information overload, we need to stand out from the competition. And more importantly, we need to stand out from what people expect to see and hear when they first come in contact with us. And so a couple of the perceptions I hear about people in finance and insurance and wealth management and things like that are that they're going to be salesy. So, they see your name, they see your job title. The first perception they're going to have is that you're going to come across and be pushing something on them or selling something to them. And if you know that to be true, and if you're sitting there shaking your head, what do you do to quell that perception? And so another thing is with the physical characteristics is if you're a tall person, you can come across as very intimidating. If you don't smile, if you're not a natural smiler, you can come across as unfriendly. So from a foundational point of view, I wanted to set the table in this webinar to say, it's how to differentiate yourself. It all starts with the initial impression people get of you and how they perceive you. And if you are sitting there saying to yourself that you're not sure how people perceive you, or you are sure how people perceive you, but you're not all that comfortable with it, that's something you want to look at very hard. And as a final thought, I want to just mention the word baggage, because part of the challenge that we're all overcoming is that when you're in sales, another salesperson before you has probably done a really poor job portraying our job, our industry, that has given the customer the perception that all salespeople act the same way. And so standing out and differentiating yourself is even more important because most people have baggage that they carry forward when they've been dealing with other salespeople. So you have to be more mindful of that. Mark, slide, please. So let's talk about the elevator pitch. You know, we hear that a lot in business. What's your elevator pitch? And I hope you walk away from this webinar today firmly knowing and believing that an elevator pitch is a horrible idea and a bad approach. Because an elevator pitch is really the opposite of how we're supposed to communicate in a sales environment. Someone walks up to you and says, "What do you do?" or "Tell me about yourself," and you have a canned, regurgitated pitch ready to share. And there's lots of problems with that. First of all, when you're in sales, you're typically not supposed to have canned, scripted answers to questions because it doesn't sound authentic and it doesn't sound genuine. So when it comes to an elevator pitch, my thought process is, how can you sound different than everybody else? Because your job title and your name and the company you work for is not all that interesting, and frankly, could have more negative baggage than positive baggage. So let me model something for you so you get a good feel for what I'm talking about. So when someone asks me what I do, my initial reaction is I say I help people become more confident and effective communicators. And one of the key elements of a good answer to "tell me about yourself, what do you do?" is your initial answer makes them curious enough to want to ask more questions. If your answer is, "I'm in wealth management," or I'm in insurance, then the second you say that, I've automatically start making assumptions about people who I've come to know in wealth management and insurance. So I've started to judge you already. I've started to connect you with previous experiences, and I'm already starting to be closed-minded to the different kind of person you may be. So that's very important for you to understand, because such a huge part of a job of a salesperson is to engage and influence people. And you've lost a lot of your ability to engage and influence people when you come right out and tell them what you do and who you work for, because they're already judging you. So I say I help people become more confident and effective communicators. And here's the key part. The goal in my response is for them to say, "Wow, that's interesting. How do you do that?" And then instinctively as a salesperson, because we all like to talk so much, we'll answer the question. I'll start talking about my training programs and my coaching and consulting and so on and so forth. But this is the big change I want you all to make from this webinar today. Instead of, first of all, I don't want you to tell them what you do and who you work for as your first thing, because that won't engage them. The second thing is, when they say, "How do you do what you do?" what I want you to do is I want you to turn around and ask them another question. And let me again model for you so you understand what I'm talking about. So when someone says, "Well, how do you help people become more confident and effective communicators?" I will say, "Well, for example, do you have anybody in your company that is really struggling in sales? Or do you find your leadership team isn't always aligned in big decisions or struggles to collaborate? Or do you have anybody at your company that struggles to make effective presentations?" So what I did there, everybody, is I picked 3 of my most common pains that I hear people have when they hire me. And I threw all 3 out there, because what I'm trying to do is, when I throw 3 different scenarios out there, depending on how the other person answers is how I will describe my company. So let's say the person says, "Yeah, to be honest, I don't think our leadership team are the best presenters I've ever seen." And if they answer that way, I will focus my description of the company around how I help people become better public speakers or presenters. If they say their sales team is struggling, I will focus my answer around sales team. But see, what happens is, when you have an elevator pitch and you lead with what you do, you don't know if that's going to resonate with that person. Because if they don't need what your elevator pitch says you help with, you lost. You've already lost their interest level. So I'm trying to get people to be resonating with the different problems I solve. And so one of the three things I suggest connects with them, and they can make an immediate connection to tie in with what I do. So this is a really, really important concept. So the process is someone says, what do you do, or tell me about yourself? Your response is different and unique. How do you help people? Not using your name of your company or your title or your industry in your answer, right? And the second part is you ask a question and don't answer how you do it to get them to offer up where the value is. Okay, so I really hope that you all understand. If anybody doesn't totally understand that concept, either you can stay around after or message me privately, because I can tell you, I've been teaching people that for years, and I have never in my entire career had a person come back and say that hasn't helped them, and that is not the right way to do it. So no more elevator pitches. Mark, slide, please. So the second thing I wanted to cover in this webinar today about differentiate is there's a guy named Simon Sinek, and his last name is spelled S-I-N-E-K. I'm sure some of you are familiar with him, and if you're not, that's fine. Simon Sinek has a TED Talk called The Why, Not the What. And it's 10 minutes of your life that I strongly recommend you YouTube that TED Talk today and watch it. I think you'll be really inspired by it. And the point I'm trying to make about this is, again, just to reinforce what I was speaking about, people don't really care what you do. You know, for those of you who go to networking events, no one goes to a networking event going, boy, I hope to meet someone in commercial real estate, or boy, I hope to meet someone in wealth management. They don't do that. People are selfish. People want to find out who can drive business for them and make referrals to them. So when you're interacting and networking with people, unless they're specifically looking for you or what you do, they don't care. And people care about why you do it, where your passion comes from. And why do they care about that? They care because we're all looking for ways to connect with other individuals. And now more than ever, with physical distancing such a factor, any way we can use to connect with another individual is valuable. So I found a lot of people over the years when I teach this, they really struggle with self-reflecting on the why they do what they do. A lot of people are in the career they are because they were told they were good at it at a young age. A lot of people do it because they were told this is the only way you're going to really make money. And so a lot of us are guided in our career choices by others and impressions and influences. But if you can self-reflect on the why that you do with what you do, not only is it a valuable story to tell people at networking events, it's valuable to tell your customers, and it's valuable to tell your prospects. So Simon Sinek, the why, very, very important. Slide, Mark, please. So one important action for all of you to take out of this webinar today is to really understand what those three questions are, or not questions, but what those three scenarios are. Because if you're going to execute the anti-elevator pitch, as I explained, you need to really be in touch with the three biggest reasons people use your services. And I really want to stress to you that when you come up with those three reasons, it has to be very tangible, nothing generic. So if you're in wealth management or insurance or healthcare or health benefits and things like that, what are the three biggest reasons people would talk about where you would say, oh, that's a good fit for me? So it's important. And again, I will offer up, if any of you take the time to put that list of three reasons together and you want to email it to you, I'm happy to give you some quick feedback on that, because that anti-elevator pitch does not work without those three reasons. The other thing I want to cover about the passion, the why and the passion story before we go any further is it's really important that there are three steps to a passion story. If you want to write this down, if you are going to self-reflect and think what your passion story would be. And the first step is what you thought you were going to do as a kid when you were growing up. The second step is what the big turning points or game-changing moments were in your life that informed you that you needed to pivot and change direction. And the third part ends, the passion story ends with, why do you love what you do? So if you're going to take the time to put a passion story together, those are the three components. Passion stories should be no longer than 15 to 30 seconds. And remember, people don't have an attention span. Part of one of the most fundamentally important skills in sales is being a good storyteller, because good, engaging stories are very powerful. Long-winded and boring ones are not. Mark, slide, please. Okay, so one more, Mark, it's got some animation in there. So let's talk about standing out, right? So there's three ways you can stand out, right? One of them is your value. And let me be very specific when I say your value. I'm talking about your value proposition. What is it that you personally bring to the table that adds value to your client? And understand that we're all in very saturated markets, right? There's so many people that do what we do that are competitive. And this is why this topic is so important, because people hear from others like you and I every day. And if you can't articulate your specific value, that's a problem. And I want to give you an example. A lot of times I talk to college graduates, and we'll just say people in their 20s. And when I ask them, when I interview them or I'm networking with them or coaching them, I'll say, okay, what's the biggest value you bring to the table? They'll say, oh, I'm really good with people. I communicate really well. Well, that doesn't tell me anything, because there's so many different ways, so many different core competencies related to communication. And if you don't know how to articulate your value, for instance, if you're sitting in front of a prospect and the prospect says, so, you know, what are you going to do for me personally? And you say, well, listen, here's what people tell me, right? I have great follow through. I'm honest, you know, I'm very reliable. And you start putting things like that in front of them. They've heard that from everybody, right? So when you're articulating your value, the words alone don't prove it. You have to give a story that proves your value. And if you just caught a little thing I did there, whenever someone asks you to talk about yourself, the best strategy is to do it from another person's point of view. So if someone says, you know, why are you so good at what you do, or what makes you such a valuable account rep for me, your answer should always start with something along the lines of, what I typically hear is, or what customers have told me is. That's always how the sentence should begin, because if it's just your word, then we don't know. But if it sounds like it's been told by somebody else, it holds a little more weight and value. Okay, Mark, next one. Okay, now your process. So let's talk about your process. This is huge. When people utilize your services, many of them are utilizing your services for the first time and don't really know what the process is going to be like. And I have to tell you, I work with a lot of people over the years, from web designers, graphic designers, wealth managers, you name it, lots of different industries. And there's a lot of unknown when you start working with someone, especially when they're handling your money. So I always really like to know what the process is going to be like. And I don't mean the generic canned process of, hey, we're going to do an analysis, then we're going to come back and make some recommendations, and then we're going to present you with an actual plan to move forward with. I mean, yes, that is a process, but that doesn't feel unique. That doesn't feel different. That feels like a process that everybody in wealth management would tell me is their process. So don't wait till someone asks what the process is like. Proactively, what are the 4 or 5 steps that you go through when you're servicing a customer before they are servicing a prospect, before they've actually become a customer? And listen, a lot of us, this might be second nature and we think we know, but when you're sharing your process, it's an opportunity to gauge the comfort level of your prospect and to test and identify if there's anything missing that they want to be included in your process. So those are 2 critical aspects to share when you're standing out. Mark, next one. And last but not least is your energy. And I can't impress upon this enough. You know, if you're not interested and if you're not excited about the stuff you're talking about, your prospects and customers sure as hell aren't going to be excited about it. So you have to measure your energy. And if you know that you're not coming across as enthusiastic, engaged, and fired up about what you do, it's a huge disadvantage. And I can tell you, I'm one of these people, I have I'm pretty much in touch with my strengths and weaknesses. I've never had a cup of coffee in my life. And people always say, thank God, because you're so hyper and energetic as it is. And that's true. And that happens to be something that comes naturally to me because I am a pretty passionate person and pretty passionate about life. But if you aren't naturally passionate, if you aren't naturally excitable, it's something you want to work on, and you may need some coaching on because it shows. And again, excitement and energy is contagious. Smiling is contagious. Yawning is contagious. So energy is important. So in summary, just to wrap this up, these are the three things. How do you articulate your value? What is it that you do better personally than everybody else in your industry? What's your secret sauce? Your process. What are the elements of your process that you can share that will make someone feel comfortable working with you and allow them the opportunity to express some fears and wants and needs that they might also need you to include in their process? And lastly, your energy. Okay, Mark, next slide. All right, so this is critical. This is an exercise I do in training for companies. It's called Anecdote is the Antidote. And I'm giving you the abbreviated version today, but I'm giving you enough where you'll be able to work with it and immediately use it. So we're talking about storytelling in this webinar. We talked about a passion story. We talked about a different approach to an elevator pitch. And now we're talking about what I call client stories. And if you remember, I just mentioned a moment ago, when you're trying to articulate your value, you need proof. And this part of our presentation today is all about the proof. So client stories are so valuable because it gives people a comfort level that others have been in their shoes. So there are three aspects to a client story, and I want to be very succinct and specific on this. One of them is the problem. Now, I'm quite confident that everybody on this call, if I said, okay, take the next 2 minutes and rattle off 3, 4, or 5 of the most common problems you hear clients express before they use your services, I'm confident you could do that pretty easily. All right. So what's the problem that people are experiencing? What are the top 3, 5, 10? But what's the solution that you put in place? And so the solution, what's key about that is the solution has to be tangible. And here's what I mean. Let's say you're dealing with someone who's interested in using you as their financial advisor. And they have come to you and told you that the problem is they don't feel the communication or follow-up is very good from their present financial advisor, okay? And they end up trusting you and using you and being happy with you. Well, now another person comes to you and expresses this problem that they're not happy with their current financial advisor. So immediately light bulb goes off in your head and you think, oh, I've dealt with someone like this before. And so you say, well, so 6 months ago, I had someone come to me with the same problem. And here's the solution I put in place. I communicate with them much more frequently than their current advisor, and they're much happier about it. That's not a solution. That's not tangible. Tangible means, what is it that you personally figured out? What are the steps that you personally took that made using you the solution? Because if it's generic and you just help them solve a problem and you don't really explain what steps you took to solve the problem, it doesn't differentiate you. So the middle part of this equation is enormous, because this is your opportunity for them to hear your solution, your tangible solution, and for them to take a step back and go, wow, I don't know if everybody would have thought of that, or I don't know if everybody would have taken those steps. Or back to the point I made earlier in the presentation about perception, I didn't think people in this industry did that type of thing. So that's the solution aspect of what we're talking about. And what does this all equal? It equals a result. So you had a problem, you put a solution in place, and then you got a result. And here's the key to the result. The result has to be measurable. You can't say the result is the customer's happy now. You can't say the result is the customer signed up with me. That's not a result. A result is measurable. So when the person you're telling this very short 20 to 30-second story to hears the result, a result could be, their investments are up 5%. A result could be their stress level has gone way down and they have a lot more confidence in financial advisors as a whole. But it's got to be something that someone can hear and go, oh, I get it. Listen, it's ROI. We're in sales and business development. You know ROI. So there's got to be some kind of specific return on investment that they can put their hands around and grab that feels measurable to them. So an exercise I do when I coach people and an exercise I do when I do trainings for companies is we will build what I call an anecdote is the antidote library of stories. Because if every person at your company puts together one story, it doesn't have to be your story. It could be someone else's story. But if you have an arsenal of 5 to 10 stories touching upon the major pain centers people experience, which makes them use you, it's a very, very valuable resource for you and your company. Mark, next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide. Yep, okay. Yep, great. So this is the last thing I'm going to touch upon today because we don't have a lot of time left. But the main thing I want to cover here is your company uniques. So we've spent a lot of time in this presentation talking about you personally, right? What is your passion story? What is your process? What is your value? All things like that. Anti-elevator pitch. Client stories. Anecdote is the antidote. And now we're on the final piece to the webinar, which is your company uniques. And it's really, really important you think hard about this. And one of the mistakes I see a lot of companies make when they try to differentiate themselves is they guess. And what I mean by guess is, how do you really know your company uniques if you haven't done proper market research? Unless you've looked at the websites of your competitors, unless you've actually shopped your competitors, the only thing you really have to go on for company differentiators is either what you've been told by the company or what you've been told by your customers of why they like you and why they want to use you. But just because a customer has told you that you provide value or your company provides value in a certain area, doesn't mean that's an actual differentiator, because other companies could provide value that way too. But this is really important because a lot of people use fluff words when they talk about differentiators like quality, performance, service, follow through. And those are not differentiators alone. And that's why, again, it comes back to the same old thing. Get a list of 3 differentiators, have stories to prove the differentiators and back them up. So if you want to use service as one of your differentiators, then I want to hear a really compelling problem solution results client anecdote that's going to prove that differentiator of service, whether it's for you or the company. So we've got to get away from using generic fluff words that people use all the time when they talk about their company and sales. And keep in mind, all of you, many of you on this call, majority of you on this call are NAIFA members. And understand this, I've worked with a lot of companies with NAIFA. I've worked with a lot of individuals. I hear a lot of the company pitches. So I'm pretty well versed in this space. And I got bad news, a lot of you sound the same. You really do. And it's very rare where someone will say something to me and I'll say, wow, I haven't heard that before. So just be mindful of the fact we get caught up in our routines and habits and set in our ways. And typically salespeople will only change a habit if they reactively see a pain or a consequence as a result of something they're doing. But unless you're actually diagnosing and evaluating specifically what is working with clients when you present to them, what is working with potential referral partners at networking events, unless you're really taking a step back to know what works, you really don't know what's working and not working. And that's a thought I would really encourage you to come out today to really stress the fact to start evaluating what works and what doesn't work and what needs to change. I'm a big fan of the expression in sales, I'm a big fan of the expression, it's an acronym, CAN-A, CANEI, which stands for continuous and never-ending improvement. And improving our methods and adopting new habits doesn't mean working harder. It just means staying mindful and aware of what's going to set us up to succeed most often. So Mark, if you could go to slide 15. Okay, so just a refresh comment on this. Remember I said earlier in the presentation, remember when you're telling a story or answering a question about yourself, you reference that you heard it from a customer, a colleague, something along those lines. Telling it from their perspective adds a lot of value. Next slide. Just want to reinforce the incredible value of storytelling. If you are not confident you are an effective storyteller, find a resource to help you improve your storytelling. It is such an essential part of engaging and influencing people in conversation. There is a reason why motivational speakers make as much money as they do, because people like to hear good, succinct, relatable stories. Next slide. I want to end on this note. Habit change is very difficult. And if you're sitting there in this webinar today and you're thinking to yourself, wow, I like this, or I like that, or that's very valuable, or I'm never going to use an elevator pitch again. And then you email me after the fact telling me how much you got from the webinar and how fired up you are. I'm happy to hear that, and that's great. But at the end of the day, let me tell you how I measure my success. I measure my success when someone emails me after a webinar, says, I will use the following. I am ready and confident and comfortable to use the following. Or they email me a couple of weeks later to tell me how the successes they've had from these new techniques. If you like something and you take a lot of notes, that's one thing. But if you're going to actually use it and try to incorporate this into your habits and routine, that's something altogether differently. So I'm really encouraging you to get off the phone today. Whatever that you took from this webinar that you like and want to use, how are you going to remember to use it? Because you haven't been using it up until this point. And if it's something you knew that you forgot about and it's like a reminder and a refresher, fantastic. But you have to find a way to incorporate these habits back into your routine. And that's your ultimate challenge. Next slide. 2 slides. One more slide, Mark, sorry. So final thoughts. Number one, Mark, go one backwards, I'm sorry. So first off, evaluations. So I do different evaluations, homegrown evaluations. A lot of times people aren't very self-aware of what their strengths and weaknesses are around sales core competencies. So I have created a sales leader evaluation and a salesperson evaluation. It gives you a gauge on your adaptability. It gives you a it gives you a feel on your emotional intelligence around sales, your core competencies. So if you want to take the evaluation and if you're interested in exploring some coaching, shoot me an email and I'm happy to pass along that evaluation. I think it will teach you a lot and will really help kind of identify where you need to work to improve your skills, regardless of what age you are. Go ahead, Mark. Lastly, Naif has been so good to me. I love its members. I love the association and I'm very appreciative. One thing that would be wonderful, Mark and I put a lot of effort into putting these together and try to give a free resource as part of your membership. So if you could post on social media what your experiences were, what you thought was valuable. If you could share it in your network on LinkedIn, that would be wonderful. Please, if you're not already, follow NAIFA on its social media channels, follow Mindset Go on our social media channels. Next one. And that's just some information if you want to reach out to me about an evaluation or coaching or something for your company. That's the information to do it. Again, my name is Mark Altman. If you want more information. And now I just like to wrap up and hang around. If anybody has any questions, I will stay around. I'm going to look in the chat box here. So, okay, first I see, do you ever have a situation that insurance people may ask or hear? Please, it's a good question. I want to say something really important about this that I normally talk about. And since that question was asked, I want to bring this up. It's very important. So I'm going to answer that question in a bit of an end around, because one of the things that's important about networking is most of us, let me back up. Most of us are what I would call reactive networkers. And a reactive networker means that if you have people in your network that you want to make referrals to and you do right by, if you hear of something that someone is saying in conversation around insurance, then you're inclined to say, okay, well, I know just the company for you, or I know just the person for you. And that's what I call reactive networking. The way I do things differently with networking is the people in my network, I have them do proactive networking. And so I have them ask a couple of questions in the course of a conversation to see if there's an opportunity proactively. And that is a very important technique I coach on, because keeping people on top of mind, usually there's a couple of questions you can ask. Now I'll give you a perfect example. Let's take wealth management for a moment. So what's going on with COVID, right? Everybody's freaking out, right, about money, and everybody's worrying about their investments. And I mean, more than ever, there's a huge strain on people in this space and financial advisors and wealth management, because people are freaking out. So in my world, I do a lot of work around teaching people mindfulness, resilience, emotional intelligence. And when it comes to money, money is such a painful topic for people that you may have clients out there that could use my services to help them cope with stress or difficulty or whatever. So the reason why I say that is because there's been wealth managers I've worked with where I said, hey, here's a couple of questions you can ask your clients, but the key is it has to fit in the flow of the conversation. You know, if you have a channel partner that's a plumber, you're not going to insert a question about, do you need a plumber, in the middle of a conversation about financial advising and money. So that's not my point. But my point is there's enough people who have synergistic industries that you could teach them how to ask a couple of questions about what you do to vet out and qualify potential opportunities. Because if it's only reactive and you're just going to sit there and wait until someone mentions it, they're going to be fewer and far between. But if you get some referral partners to be proactive and are asking a couple of questions in the flow of their presentations, I think you'll find you'll get a lot more opportunities. So as far as a specific situation for insurance, I don't have one in this kind of medium. I don't know that I'd be comfortable sharing that, but if you want to reach out to me privately, I can talk to you about that. Any other questions? Okay, so last but not least, certainly Mark and I have other webinars planned. He does a great job promoting them, so you guys can schedule. On Mindset Go events page on our website, you can always see a list of the webinars that we're doing with NAIFA and we're doing in general. And otherwise, wishing you all happiness, health, safety for you, your family, your colleagues, your employees, coworkers. And thanks again for taking the time to join, and we'll look forward to talking to you.